All right, and this is Conflict Management Part 2. We'll continue this conversation. Again, this comes from Public Relations Strategies and Tactics by Wilcox and Cameron, the 10th edition. The conflict management life cycle from beginning to end, and really before the beginning. This shows the big picture of how to manage a conflict. The proactive phase. This is before really a conflict emerges and preparing for conflict. Activities and thought processes that can prevent, actually that should say prevent, not present, but prevent a conflict from arising. There's such thing as issues tracking and issues management, kind of keeping track of issues that you know may lead to conflict and keeping abreast of what is happening there with respect to your organization. Crisis planning or conflict planning. We are going to get into this term of crisis management here very soon. But here in this proactive phase, and you can see the graphic there illustrating this, we plan for a conflict or plan for a crisis and try very hard to be prepared for that. And then the strategic phase is where an issue has become an emerging conflict. It is beginning to become a thing that needs to be addressed. There is risk communication. This is communicating to your people within the organization and your stakeholders about this situation that it seems to be developing. So communication so everyone understands what is happening and what the situation is. That's valuable. Conflict positioning in anticipation of events, and we've talked about positioning as putting our organization in the best position possible to respond to a conflict. And then preparation of a crisis management plan. This would be more specific. If we're in this strategic phase now, we're seeing a specific thing that is developing, and we are developing a management plan for that specific problem. And then continuing the conflict management life cycle, the reactive phase is where the conflict reaches a critical level of impact, and we are very much engaged in it. It's front and center, and perhaps there is publicity about it. The crisis management plan here is implemented. We hope for conflict resolution. We hope that the problem can be resolved, and perhaps to our mutual benefit with the people who are outside of the organization. But it's possible that we might lead to litigation, might lead to a court case, a lawsuit. And we saw that contingency curriculum in the previous outline in the previous video. That would be on one far end of the scale if we go to court. And then the recovery phase is the aftermath of the crisis. We get into reputation management, which we'll be talking about in the next outline in the next video, and image restoration at that point after then the conflict is over. Here we'll start talking about crisis management, and this is really a term and a concept that I'm a little more familiar with and comfortable with. These are high-profile events. Accidents, terrorist attacks, natural disasters that typically get a lot of media coverage, and that increases the pressure on the organization. Now, how will the organization respond? Now, you cannot plan for every situation, but a lot of them you can. The majority really can be predicted. How an organization responds in the first 24 hours often determines whether the situation remains a relatively minor incident or becomes a full-blown crisis. So that the first response is very important. Legendary businessman Warren Buffett, you may have heard of Warren Buffett, says, get it right, get it fast, get it out, put the message out, put your message out to the public, and get it over with. So he says, deal with it quickly, but get the information right, respond fast, and get it over with as soon as possible. A couple of videos I'm going to show you on crisis management, and this is the first one.
When crisis strikes, what is the single most important first step the organization needs to take in managing the crisis? Hey everybody, Melissa Agnes here, and I'm here with this week's episode of the Crisis Ready video series, where I aim to help you implement a crisis-ready culture one tip, strategy, or case study at a time. So I was asked this question this week, and I thought, what a really good question, because the answer may not be so evident. So crisis has struck, and you want to know what is the single most important first step your organization needs to take in order to successfully manage the crisis. And the answer is that you need to get the right people in the room to analyze the breadth and scope of the incident, to determine the impact or the potential impact on the organization and its stakeholders, and to determine and align on immediate next steps for successful crisis management. Now, that may seem evident, but who are the right people? So of course, we have the top layer. We have senior management, the C-suite, who is responsible for declaring a crisis for the organization and accountable for the organization's crisis response. So clearly, you need those decision makers in the room. But above and beyond that, you also want to make sure that you have the right people to feed the executives the right information. What does this mean? This means that any stakeholder group that's potentially impacted, you want to make sure you have a representative of those stakeholder groups in the room with you. Any business unit, business sector, region, product, service that may be impacted, whoever heads those departments, those regions, those business units, those business heads, you want to make sure that they are in the room as appropriate. Legal and compliance as well. So basically what you want is you want to have the right people in the room that are each looking at the crisis from their perspective, from their touch point within the organization and touch point of the crisis, so that you can really come together and discuss and analyze the full breadth and scope of the severity of the incident, the potential impact of the incident on the organization and its stakeholders, and so that you can really get a good understanding of what the organization's next steps in crisis management need to be.
All right, and we will continue now and talk about the question, what is a crisis? And so what are we defining to be a crisis? It is a major occurrence with a potentially negative outcome affecting the organization, and also its public or publics, products, services, or good name. So we're talking about something that has a negative outcome or may have a negative outcome, and that this is going to affect the organization in some way that we hope to minimize the severity of it. There is a crisis in the organizations. There's a crisis if the organization stakeholders perceive there to be a crisis. If they think there is a crisis, stakeholders being the people that you serve, who have an interest and concern for your organization, if they perceive there to be a crisis, then basically there is a crisis. Only 14% of business crises are unexpected. Most things can be foreseen, can be predicted, and we can therefore be somewhat prepared for them. The top 3 triggers for a crisis are financial irregularities, so some problem involving money, and something that has gone wrong, unethical behavior, and of course those can be one and the same, and then executive misconduct, something that one of the leaders of the organization has done that has potentially caused embarrassment. So here's the second video on crisis management.
The very first thing you should look for in a crisis management PR is that they know what they're doing and they like handling crises. I say that because if a crisis management PR does not like handling crises, then they will not do what it takes to confront the very situations that need to be confronted in order to put your reputation back in place. When your reputation is at risk, you lose money, you can't make sales, people don't trust you, and you can't pay your bills. It's a very scary situation. The biggest failure that CEOs make when there is a crisis is that they try to handle that crisis and they get so mired down in that negativity. That's the last thing you should do. The very first thing you should do is take your head out of the sand and hire an expert in crisis management PR. The first thing you're going to do when you hire a PR is you're going to put your attention on production. You need to sequester off that negativity and handle your employees so that their morale is high and so that your company is producing like never before. The reason why you're able to do that is because that PR will take that negativity, will create a strategy that's very fast, very fluid, very effective in order to handle for good what's going on. At Johto, we handle the attack, but we also build up an arsenal of good works and good publicity that will dwarf any negativity you could ever receive. Listen, the best defense against a crisis is being proactive in your PR well before a crisis could ever happen. When you have ongoing PR and publicity that's creating a groundswell of public opinion, you have a large pool, a huge resource of people and groups and entities that can come to your defense if you do get attacked. And believe me, it makes those naysayers and attackers a little more hesitant of saying something against you if they think that that groundswell of public opinion is going to come back on them.
So I'm going to pause that there, and you can watch the rest of it if you like. Some interesting things that she's talking about there, and one is keeping your own people, keeping their morale high. That's an important aspect of crisis management, and then also building up that reservoir of goodwill. That can be very valuable to you and will be very valuable to you in a crisis if you have accomplished a lot of good things that we can remind people about when some sort of accident happens or some mistake has been made. Strategies for responding to a crisis, and these range, again, think about the contingency continuum. We were talking about these range from attacking the accuser, perhaps threatening a lawsuit, denial that there is no crisis. Now, if you do that, you should be very sure that there is no crisis. Because denial, then that turns out to clearly be false, is even more damaging. The excuse, we had no control over events leading to the crisis. Justification, consumer misuse may be alleged, the blame is shifted. All of these, I think, are fairly risky approaches, and they can be used if the circumstances are just right. Ingratiation, now we're moving more toward the accommodation end of the continuum here. Action is taken that should be appease. Action is taken to appease the publics involved. Corrective action is taken. Steps are taken to repair the damage and to prevent it from happening again. And so once again, we are moving toward the other end of the spectrum here, toward accommodation. A full apology. The organization takes responsibility and asks forgiveness, and compensation may be included. So there's the full range here of approaches in a crisis. And next we will talk about, some of these are accommodative, the latter ones there, and some of them are defensive, and we will talk about accommodative versus defensive strategies next. Thanks.